Thank you for attending today's webinar on SOLIDWORKS Composer. Today we're going to be talking about creating animations using SOLIDWORKS Composer, and for those of you who were a part of the first webinar I did this year, that was creating high-resolution images from SOLIDWORKS Composer. First thing I want to bring up, or I guess first thing I should introduce myself. My name is Dan Lubbe. I'm one of the composer specialists here inside of GoEngineer. We have quite a few of us spread throughout the company in different regions. So to kind of get started, the first thing I wanted to point out is that if you weren't able to jump into I think it was 2 months ago, we did the first webinar of the year for Composer on creating images for Word documents. So the very first thing I wanted to bring up is the GoEngineer knowledge base. If you go to Google and you type in GoEngineer knowledge base, it's a very large, robust database of white papers, etc., things to help you with any of the tools that GoEngineer has to offer. The second website I was going to show was the events calendar. So this webinar today, I'm not entirely sure how everyone got the link to sign up. Maybe it was emailed to you, but if you're ever interested in just seeing what webinars are coming up in the next few months, we generally have our webinars scheduled out, I think, up to a year in advance for most. So you should be able to check out the events calendar. Again, on Google, type in GoEngineer events, and it'll be the first link in Google. So here is my SOLIDWORKS Composer interface, and to actually really jump in, I'm going to open up a second. Oh, that's the right one. This one here. This is the Composer interface. For all of you that were a part of the 101 and just creating views, you'll notice this looks pretty familiar. These are all the views that I created during the first webinar. So to kind of click through these, basically in Composer, I click on different things, and it's basically moving my camera as well as highlighting properties. So if I've turned on things like shadowing, lighting, mirroring on the ground, these things are captured in each of these views. Going forward, we can incorporate additional reference geometry like these players. We can also create detailed views, add text, balloons, callouts, arrows, things like this. Basically, I went through and took a snapshot of my 3D geometry that I've imported from SOLIDWORKS, and I went through, created all of these nice views, and then really what I ended up doing in that last Composer webinar is taking all these views and publishing them out as high-resolution JPEG images. We can publish out as JPEG, bitmap. I mean, all the normal high-resolution image file types we support in Composer. Another thing, if you are a technical illustrator, sometimes pixelated images is not what you're looking for. You're looking for graphics and line art. We do, within SOLIDWORKS Composer, not only have a high-resolution image workshop, but a technical illustration workshop. So this would allow you to publish out graphics using line art, which is good for manuals, etc., online content, things like that. So these views were all created the first time around. We basically published all these views out. We put them into a Word document, and then we showed one of the biggest benefits of Composer, and that's the update process. So this is after a design change has happened in the SOLIDWORKS assembly file. I can then come back into Composer, and I can hit File Update, and I can basically go search for my SOLIDWORKS assembly file that's changed, and all the content and views I've created in here will be updated and then just need to be republished. So Composer makes it very easy to start working on documentation early on. Now, that is kind of the first portion of Composer. I like to call that's like the main kind of like what most people look at Composer for. But, you know, nowadays with technology moving forward and things advancing, you know, a lot more companies are moving into animation, you know, learning how to animate work instructions or assembly procedures, things like this. That's why we have this webinar 201. So today we're going to talk about creating animations. I'm going to possibly use these views towards the end if we have time. We do have the ability to drag and drop them onto our animation to help speed up the process. But I'm going to start from scratch. For any of you that are maybe brand new to animation, Composer makes it very easy to create very nice looking animations. So in this file here, you'll notice I already have something down towards the bottom that we call a timeline. This timeline consists of keys, And these keys control all different types of properties, as well as location of components, location of cameras, and things like that. This top row here, you'll notice these are like green keys here. We have some gray keys here. The keys try to color coordinate themselves to the component's color that's being changed, whether it's the component's location or appearance or one of the properties down here in the left-hand corner of the screen. And we'll get in depth more about what that is, but I wanted to kind of just show you the animation that I previously created just so you can see what we're going to be working towards today. So I'll hit play and I'll let this thing run. You'll notice camera zooms in, components move out, explode, camera moves again, pins come out, things highlight, different colors, disappear, so opacity is being used. We have some kind of complex motion, things like that. So this animation isn't too long. To really get in and kind of describe what I'm doing, I want to make sure that we have somewhat of a simple animation to use as an example. So we have some motor kind of basically being changed. We could consider this animation kind of a disassembly procedure for replacing a motor on one side of this robot. So this is really just kind of an example to see what we're doing. You'll notice a lot of this is really just backwards towards the end when it comes to the assembly procedure. So I basically designed the disassembly procedure, and then once I brought in the new motor, I basically just copied the animation and reversed it. So when we create animations, we do have the ability to, for huge time savings in Composer by just taking the first portion of the animation and flipping it around. So if we're disassembling to start, we can basically just flip it around and create an assembly procedure all within one animation timeline. So this came to about a minute-long animation. I'm going to only end up creating about 25 to 30 seconds of animation, and then we'll just copy the rest and flip it around. So I'm going to go ahead and close this session of Composer. And this is my current session of Composer. So as of right now, you'll notice my timeline contains no keys. If I hit play, nothing happens because I haven't set up anything to happen. I do, however, still have my views from the last webinar. We do in Composer have the ability to create all of this within one file. So I can create all of my views for my product documents that are going to be printed to PDF, etc. I also can create animations within the same file. So let's see here. First things first. In the timeline, we have something, this red bar. This represents a time bar. So wherever this red line is on any of these second markers, basically that's where I'm looking or viewing into the animation. This can be dragged around. So after we've created keys on our time frame that basically control translation of a part, or maybe opacity, something's fading in and fading out as it's being assembled or disassembled, I can move this time bar back and forth within my timeline to basically see what's happening during the animation. Now, right now in my animation, I have a default screen with a blue background and a white gridded floor, and that may not be exactly what I want in my animation. If it's a white background where basically my product is suspended in air, it may be best to use a different view as a starting point. So all I need to do is come and find the view I'd like to start with here. In this case, it would be the workable default. I'm going to drag and drop this onto my timeline right over that 0-second mark. Okay. One of the biggest concepts in Composer animation or time-based animation when it comes to any application is basically setting keys. Okay, each key, as a very basic example, controls the location of a part. All we need to do as the designers of the animation is place one key with a part selected of where it is at time A, and then another key at where that part is at time B. The actual translation or movement of that part is all done by the software. We don't actually specify any of the movement. All we do is specify where a part is at time A and time B. The software does the rest. So as an example of this, I will move my time bar up forward at about 1 second, and this is just an example here. I'm going to come in and highlight my wheel, and I'm going to use my quick access toolbar for my translation tool. Basically at 1 second, I'm going to use what we call a location key. So I'm going to highlight this. You'll notice my timeline then kind of becomes a darker gray. That represents how long my animation is. And also you'll notice there's a key put in here. So this key is black. It represents the color of the tire. It's just a better visual for whoever's designing the animation to know what it is that key represents. So I will move my time bar forward, and now I will move my component to where I want this thing to be at 2 seconds. So I can use any of the translation tools, linear translate, rotation, explode tools, doesn't matter. I can use any of these to move the component to where I want it to be at time B, and then at this point now I go ahead and set a location key for 2 seconds. So if we kind of zoom in here, first thing you'll notice, a line pops up. This is the animation line. So this is where this component is moving, and at the end of each line we have a dot. A red dot represents a key in the animation. So if I come back to 1 second, you'll notice my part is here. If I come forward to 2 seconds, you'll notice it's at its end point. If I play this animation now, I'm going to unselect the wheel so we can see it. I'll play, and you watch this thing go from point A to point B between that 1 second mark and that 2 second mark. Okay, just like I was saying before, if I grab this time bar, I can drag this back and forth, and I can see where components reside in the animation at that given time. So animation can be very easy, right? I've exploded this out within a second. If I want this thing to go back, be reassembled at 2.5 seconds, I have something where we can copy a key. So if you remember, this key at 1 second was basically recording the location of it when it was fully assembled. So instead of trying to reassemble it by moving it using translation keys, right? If I grab this and I'm going to try to come back here and I don't know if I can't quite get this. Why do that? Why even spend the time doing that? Composer makes it very easy. All I need to do is hold down the control key and copy this first key to 2.5 seconds. And now if you watch this animation, it basically explodes out, goes back in, exactly to that original point that was recorded at 1 second. So creating keys, right? The very first one we're looking at here, it's kind of grayed out now because I have no components selected, but I have set location key. This key always controls where a component is in space. Okay, so that's what this key is. We need to set this before we move the component and after we move the component. Okay, so we set 2 location keys, one for time A, one for time B, and that's really all there is to it. When it comes to property keys, so if I go ahead and maybe I'll leave this thing exploded out. I'm going to basically create a bounding box around this one key. So I'm just creating, basically dragging my left mouse button over this key, and then just hit delete. I'm going to remove it. And now you'll notice it's still out here in space because at 2 seconds we specified it was out there. And now it stays at that spot until we move it again. So the reason I do this, because I want to talk about opacity or property keys. So with this component selected, I'll maybe go to 2.5 seconds. And from here, I can highlight what we call opacity. Opacity is just basically its transparency. Right now it's at 255, which is 100% opaque. So I'm going to record this at 100% opaque at 2.5 seconds. So I have to make sure I highlight the property I want to record. If I chose to record multiple properties, because I was having multiple properties change during the animation, I would just need to highlight different properties. But for the time being, opacity is the only property I need to record. So I come down here, and instead of hitting the location key, right to the left of it I have set keys. This little piece of paper represents a property key. So from here I'm going to go ahead and set a property key at 2.5 seconds for this part to be at 255. Now I'm going to move my time bar forward to 3 seconds. And at 3 seconds, I want this opacity to be 0. Once I have this opacity property highlighted with a value of 0, my time bar is at that initial state of 3. I choose to create that property key. And now if we pull our time bar back and forth, I'll unselect so it makes it easier to see. I move this back and forth. It goes from 255 all the way to 0. So it's basically animating a property between the time that we've given. Okay, so that's setting a property key. Another big important thing. If I play this in real time, which I do on a regular basis as I'm designing animations, I'm thinking about animations as though I'm watching it as an end user. So someone who's going to be putting together my product using my animation. Is this too fast? Is it too slow and boring? You know, how can I make this as visually appealing as possible and comprehensible, if that's even a word? So basically, I'm going to come here and hit play. If I decided that that movement was too quick or too slow, all I need to do here in the animation timeline is take this key and spread it out. So distance over time, right? Come here. I'll come back to my 1 second mark when this thing begins to move, and you'll notice it moves much slower this time. If I wanted it to be faster, I pull this in closer, and now if we watch the animation from there, very quick. So a lot of this can be done and edited after you've created your initial location A and your location B. Then you can watch it in real time and you can decide, hey, do I need to add space between here, or do I need to kind of minimize space between here? Now, I can always drag these keys if that's what I want to do. If it's a single key I need to drag. If I have multiple keys, behind, so maybe I should have left those opacities, I can basically put a bounding box here, and I get this little arrow at the top. If I drag this, it moves every key behind this arrow inward. So it's basically reducing and eliminating time. So it's another method of kind of reducing space between keys. So that was kind of like the brief tutorial of how to set keys. Location keys and property keys are right next to one another. A third key that's important, is a set camera key. So a lot of the time we're going to want the camera to basically zoom into a certain area before we perform any sort of translation of components or hiding of components. So first thing I'm going to do is zoom into my model. So from 0 seconds to 1 second, I do not want my camera to move. I recommend not having movement right when the user presses play on your video. So I usually give it about a second or two before any sort of camera movement happens. This initial camera here, I'm just going to re-record at 1 second. So you'll see here nothing happens between 0 and 1 seconds because my camera is just being held steady in the same location and space from 0 to 1. If I move a little further forward, now at 1 second, I want movement to happen until 2 seconds, so I'll move my time bar to 2. And then I'll come in here and I'll just kind of use my cursor and I'll kind of zoom in on maybe this side fender or wheel cover. Once I like where this is in space, I can basically record this new camera location. You'll notice right on that 2 second time bar, I have a camera key. So if I watch this now and hit play, it zooms into my wheel, which is very nice. Very easy. Again, cameras, part location, opacity, all we do is we set the beginning and the end. The software does the rest of the animation. Very, very neat stuff. So from here, we've zoomed into the wheel. I want to explode this wheel fender, and then I want to hide it as though I'm disassembling. So I'm going to highlight my component that I'm going to be exploding. I'm going to move my time bar to where this component will start moving and set a location key. When I set this location key at 2.5, it basically records its position at 2.5, and it already has a property key at 0 seconds. Another thing to keep in mind in Composer animation, these keys stack on top of one another, so we can have keys on top of one another. If you ever need to dig down and find one specific key for one component, I have something here called Show Keys for Selected Actors Only. So if I click on this, it's only going to show me keys that are basically controlling that selected actor on the screen, which right now is my fender. So at 2.5 seconds from here, I'm basically setting its beginning location at maybe 3 seconds here. I want this thing to be pulled out a little bit, maybe to here, and I'll set that in space, and I will record that location. So as of right now, if I pull this back and forth from 2.5 to 3 seconds, it moves out. Now, maybe at 3.5 seconds, I want this to go to the right side. I already have its location in space at 3 seconds, which is right where it is now. At 3.5 seconds, I want this to be over here. Okay, when I do that, I set a third location key, and now if we watch the animation, it goes from 2.5 to 3, it explodes out, then it moves over to the side. Very, very easy, and you'll notice that animation line really helps us visually understand where this file is, or excuse me, this part is going and coming from. And that line can also be changed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. So this thing has exploded out. If I unselect it now, we watch our animation from the beginning. Zooms into this fender, it explodes out and moves to the right-hand side of the screen. Now, this fender is already semi-transparent, but we want it to be 100% gone. So I'm going to come up to about 4 seconds. I'm going to highlight my component, and I want to change its appearance property of opacity. So at 4 seconds, I'm going to come over and highlight opacity, which you'll notice is already at 89%. And so at 4 seconds, I'm going to record it at 89%. And now I'm going to move this forward to about 4.5 seconds, change its opacity down to 0, and hit record. So now if we look here, I'll move my time bar over. 4.5 seconds, it now disappears 100% from the screen. So 0% opacity, this thing will be invisible. It's technically still in space. It's technically out and still exploded. If I kind of do this now and I go to 4.5 where it's 100% gone, you'll notice it's still out in space, right? It's been exploded away from this main assembly. So that's a manual way of hiding a component, and in just a minute we'll talk a little bit about using kind of some automatic buttons to automatically hide components. So my fender has been exploded. It has the opacity we've changed from 100% to 0%. And now the next thing I want to do is maybe possibly move my camera in a little further into these pins. Okay, so my fender is exploded out. It disappears. At 5 seconds, I want to zoom in a little further. So I want my camera to move. I'm going to set an initial key for my camera. I'm going to come into about 6 seconds here, and I'm just going to zoom in a little further here on some of these gears. And that's about good. And I'll set my final location for my camera. So after this fender has disappeared, my camera zooms in even a little further just so we can get a better view of what's inside of this wheel cover. So here we're seeing some rollers sitting on pins as well as some gears that, if I rotate the model, you can see is attached to a motor. Maybe it's kind of hard to see here, but the motor's kind of got a bracket sitting on top of it, etc. And it's what really drives this. Now, notice I move the camera around. You're probably wondering, well, you don't want to move the camera around because you've already set some keys. You don't want to create any additional keys. Unless you push the key button for setting a camera key, nothing to worry. I can grab my time bar and just, as soon as I move my time bar, it snaps back to where that camera should be in space. Now, when we're designing, sometimes it's necessary to be able to zoom into something to get, maybe some fine movement details recorded using the keys. So you have this button here called Camera Play Mode. And you'll notice here, if I move my camera with Camera Play Mode on, as soon as I move my time bar, it snaps back to where the cameras in my timeline have recorded themselves being shown in space. If I turn this Camera Play Mode off, you'll notice I can move my camera around, and now if I move my time bar, you'll notice basically the animation plays but without moving the camera to where I've recorded in the animation. Now, this tool is really just for designing, while you're designing the animation. It's something that will not be recorded, at the very end when you're outputting like an AVI file or something like that. So I basically turned it on. I get back into here. So I have Camera Play Mode on. This is the angle in which my video will be recorded. And now the next thing I want to do is I want to take these rollers and I want to highlight them so the user recognizes and sees them on the screen. Okay, so I can come here and I can grab these rollers using the Control key. I can do multiple select. And you'll notice we have a bunch of different tabs in Composer. We have one called Assembly. If I come to Assembly, you'll notice I also have these rollers highlighted in this assembly tree over here. If I choose to in the future, I can create something called a selection set. So selection set is really just if I know I'm going to be working with these 4 components on a regular basis, maybe hiding and showing all as a group or exploding, I can create a selection set from them. So I have this button here called Create Selection Set. I come down here and I can say, I can call this whatever I would like, all rollers. And basically now if I come to the bottom, Anytime I can click all rollers, all 4 rollers are selected automatically on the screen. And now I can act on them within the animation. So here, I want to use something that we call an effect. I want this thing to flash at the user so they notice it before I basically change its appearance to nothing. So under the effects here, we have 3 very popular ones called fade in, fade out, and hotspot. So here I'm going to basically choose hotspot. And in my animation, you'll notice 3 keys were automatically created. Okay? So with these selected, basically take a look at the properties over here. Recognize which one is changing between these keys. Do you see which one it is? It's emission. Emission is going from 0 up to 1 and then back down to 0. So if we look at that in real time without having them selected so we can see what it really looks like, I click it, they basically just flash at the user. Now, knowing how to manipulate keys in the animation is very important. It's a huge time saver. I know that the property of emission is at basically 1 at this point in time. This is what this key is recording. So why not make these flash a couple times? I'm going to grab these 2 keys, hold down the control key on this black bar below, and I'm going to copy and paste basically these keys behind it. And now if we watch the animation, it's not only going to flash once, it flashes twice. If I chose to, I could continue to replicate these keys and continue to have this flashing action happen. So I'm going to grab these rollers again. I'm going to move my time bar a little further forward to about maybe 8, maybe like 7 3/4 seconds. And I want these things to disappear now. So they've flashed, they got the user's attention. Now I want these things to disappear. So I could come over here and I could highlight opacity and I could record it at 100%, move my time bar forward, change the opacity to 0, and then set a second key. That's the manual way of doing it. But if you recognized when I went into the effects for hotspot, I also have fade out. And fade out does that exact procedure for you, but it's automatic. So I'll click on fade out. You'll notice 2 keys are created. The first key here records opacity at 255. Second key records that opacity at 0. So if we watch this full animation portion now, once zoomed into these rollers, they flash to the user, then they disappear. So very neat stuff. SOLIDWORKS Composer has tons of these little buttons that help with just automating these minor procedures that we need to do when creating animations. So now that I have my rollers gone, I'll move a little further ahead, maybe to about 8.5 seconds. And I'm going to take one of these pins and I'm going to explode this out. So I'll set its initial location key. I'll come here to about 9 seconds, pull it out to where I want it. If I'm not entirely sure, I need to grab this blue one here. Pull this out, explode. Go ahead and set a location key for that. I move my time bar. It snaps my camera back to where it should be. 8.5 to 9 seconds, this one pin explodes. So why do one pin when I have 4 pins to explode? Maybe it was a mistake and I ended up exploding one pin and I realized I forgot to grab these other 3 pins. So should I delete these keys and start over? Absolutely not. Let's just copy the transformation we did on this pin with the opposing 3 pins. So I'm going to come back to 8.5 seconds. I'm going to highlight the 3 pins that I forgot to grab, and I'm just going to re-record their location on top of that first pin's location. I come to 9 seconds now. Notice they haven't moved because we haven't included them in the animation. And I'll come to this Transform tab. This is where we perform all movements on components. And we have something here called Copy Transformation. So I'll choose Copy Transformation. I'm going to come down here, hold my cursor over this pin, and you'll notice I get a slight graphical preview of all 3 pins just following the same translation. And as soon as those have been moved out before I move my time bar, I can go ahead and just set a location key for those 3 selected components or pins. And now if we watch from 8.5 to 9 seconds, all 4 pins come out evenly and at the same distance. So Copy Transformation is a very effective key to use when developing animations. Okay, next one we want to do here. We want to explode our main gear. Okay, so I'm going to come down a little further, maybe 9.5 seconds. Actually, before we explode these, I probably don't want these pins sitting out in space. So let's go ahead and use the selection set I created of these pins, and let's use that quick effect of fading out, and now they're gone. Let's move forward here to about 10.5 seconds, and let's talk about making some trickier movement when it refers to a component. So here I have this gear. I'll highlight. I'm going to explode this thing directly out, and then I'm going to basically, I don't know, maybe move it around a little bit more in addition to just that linear explode. So I'm going to record its beginning location. I'll move this out to about 11 seconds. I'll pull this thing out, and maybe as soon as it comes off of its shaft, I'll record. I'll move this out a little further, and now I'm going to incorporate two movements into one movement. So as this thing is exploded out, I'll pull this over to the side, and maybe as it's being pulled over to the side, I also want to rotate it so people can really get a good view of what this part is. So maybe I'll flip this around, just so it gives them a 360 as this thing is being exploded. So I come back here, I'll unselect the part so we can see it in action. It explodes out and then flips around to the other side to really show the user what part that is as they're disassembling. So again, if you notice, I have very quick movement in this half second, right? Between here and here, the distance is not very much, so the movement's very easy to understand, but it comes out and kind of flies. So if I need to, I can highlight all three of these keys, and I can spread them out. So I spread them out like this, and now if we watch the animation, it'll be much slower and a much smoother transition from being exploded and then opening up to the outside. Again, just like everything else, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hide this. So I'll take my effect here and I will fade out. Okay. Very next thing I want to do here is we're going to pull out this gear here. And this is underneath the top enclosure cover. So we may have to do some kind of tricky manipulation with the movement. I'm going to go ahead and pan my timeline by holding down my mouse key. So I'm going to hold this over. I'm going to move my time bar to where I want to start moving this gear. I'll highlight the component I want to move. Basically set my initial location key. Using my quick access toolbar, I'm going to choose translation. And now you'll notice my translation, it's kind of off-centered. It's not really, my axes are kind of pointing into 45-degree angles. If I wanted to change that, I could come up to the Transform tab, and I have something called Set Pivot. So this little transform tool that you see here with arrows and stuff, we call this the pivot. We can go ahead and set this on the local coordinate system, which may not be different in this case. Or we can, rotate the pivot system if we wanted to. But in this example, I'm just exploding straight out to start, so I don't really care too much about where it is. So first thing, I've set my location at 14 seconds of where it is right now. I'm going to turn off camera play mode because I want to be able to zoom in and see from the side to make sure that as this thing explodes, it's not hitting this top fender or overlapping geometry as it's exploded. So I'm going to take this 14.5 seconds. I want it to come out to about here or just off the shaft, and I'm going to go ahead and record. I'll move forward a little bit to about 15 seconds, and now maybe if I come back out here, I want this thing to move downward. So it's going to come down, and very lastly, maybe I want this thing to kind of explode outward. So I just moved it down. I almost forgot to set a location key. I'll move forward a little further, and using this plane tool, I can move it along a plane out to the side here. And I'll set that final location key. So if we watch what's happening here, I'll go ahead and hit play. Comes out, drops down, goes to the side. I already know this last portion of my animation. Oops, I double-clicked, which shows me my entire animation. I can just zoom back into where I was. So I like to see just second markers. So we'll go to here. So I'll notice that last, because it's such a big distance, still only happening within a second, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move this one key out to another half second beyond. So now when this thing animates, comes out, moves, and slowly explodes out to the side. Now with this highlighted, I can see its animation line. If you notice that from the side, it does it does move away from this wheel, which is good, but it's very technical animation, right? Linear movements, not always the best looking movement, you know, maybe not so appealing to the eye. I mean, it makes sense, but it's just kind of boring. So we have additional options for kind of sprucing up this animation line. So with the component selected in the properties window, I can come down here, and under animation path, by default it's set to linear. We can change this to custom, and when we change it to custom, we get spline points. So now if I grab one of these points, you'll notice I can change the movement of this thing. So I can grab these spline points and make these nice kind of smooth transitions. If I wanted to change how this is done here, and now if we look to the side, I may want to move this out a little bit, change these spline points down, and maybe even a little further. So it's basically coming away from the part, and just make that a nice smooth transition. Okay. Oops, forgot to select. Highlight my component again. So if you watch your animation now from the side, oh no, I forgot to do one thing. Notice in the properties window, some of these properties have this little red circle next to them. That means they cannot be configured throughout the animation. What this means is that it can be one or the other. So the animation path for this component, this gear, can either always be linear during this animation, or it can always be custom. If I change this to custom, I have to record that in the animation. All I have to do is one time only set a property key for this custom path, and now that will remain the entire animation. So we see here we have this nice little swoop, comes out and moves along this nice spline towards this back end. So you can incorporate these nice animation paths during animation if you choose. Now I'm going to turn camera play mode back on, and I'm going to watch this thing from the angle of the camera. Basically play. And it's just, we can't really see it, but you were able to see how I was able to add a spline as a custom movement. This can allow for some very complex movement when disassembling parts within your assemblies. So again, just like everything else in here, I'm going to highlight this component. A little further ahead here, I'm going to go ahead and use the effect to fade this out. Okay, so we're moving along our way, or moving along. Next thing I want to do here is the gear shafts. So I have these two gear shafts here. We're going to be working with the motor underneath. So one thing I want to do for sure is kind of move the camera down so we can see up and underneath that top cover. So I'm going to set my camera key of where I want the camera to start moving. And at 8 seconds here, I'm going to go ahead and drop this down so we can see that motor in here. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and set another camera key here. So if we watch this whole animation, which I like to do as I go, this disappears, camera key moves down. If I needed to zoom in, that's fine. I could incorporate that as another camera key. So about half second later, I want these shafts to not, I'm not going to use the effects key here for hotspot. I want to show something else. We can control color of components. So without these selected, you'll notice that they're gray, like a dark gray, just like a lot of the components in my model. I'm going to change the color. So first thing I want to do here in the properties windows, I'm going to come up to the color of the component. I'm going to highlight that property because this is the property I'm going to be recording. So from here, I'll set a property key, move my time bar forward to about, actually maybe a little more than that, small increment. I'm going to have this flash, and I'm going to have this flash a green color. So I'm going to choose this. I have some default color options here that I can choose from quickly, or I can go into a color wheel and I can get very granular and choose from this color wheel, or if I want to, I can go into custom and get even more specific about color. So I'll go ahead and choose this green color, and now because these components are selected in the assembly, you don't really recognize that they're green, but I can see the color over here is green. And I'm going to go ahead and set a property key for green. So if you watch here, the color property, or if you watch here in the graphics area, they're now green, and as I move this forward, they turn back to gray. So just like everything else in the animation, it translates from one thing to the next, whether it be color, opacity, location, doesn't matter. And so at this point, if I want these to flash green, all I need to do is hold down the control key and copy these keys a few times. Right? I can just continue to copy them. And now if we watch the animation, these things will flash green, and then we can make them disappear. So I'll move my time bar forward a little bit. I'm going to highlight these two with the control key, and I'm going to go ahead and use the effect to fade these out. So these things will flash, and then they will disappear, which really helps. Okay. Next thing we want to do is we want to pull this motor out. So let's incorporate two things at once, because we haven't done that yet. I'm going to come to 21 seconds. I'm going to record the camera, because I'm going to tilt the camera up a little bit. So at 21 seconds, it stays in place between 18 and 21 seconds. I'm going to move this up, 22. I'm going to highlight my model, kind of come up like this, maybe to the side a tiny bit. And right now you're probably like, well, how are we going to explode that motor? We can't even see it. That's fine. We're going to do two things at once, but we have to start with one. So camera is now going to translate from 21 up to about 22. At the same time this is translating up, maybe just a little bit after 21 seconds, I want this cover piece to become semi-transparent. So what am I going to do? I'm going to highlight opacity. I'm going to record that property at 100%, and up just before the camera stops moving, I'm going to go ahead and change this opacity down to 75. So we can see the motor within the assembly, and I'm going to record that. So if we watch that portion of the animation again with nothing selected, this thing begins to move up. Top portion of the cover begins to become transparent. And now we can see inside, we can see our motor. Perfect. So I'm going to move a little further ahead. I'm going to go ahead and use the flashing key on this bracket. We're going to make this disappear. So I basically come to where I want it, highlight the opacity key, and we're going to set up the effect of hotspot. I'm going to record these two keys to make it flash more than once. And then after that portion of the animation, you'll see it kind of flash even when it's selected. You can see the property moving for sure within the property manager. I'm going to move up a little bit further to 24 seconds, and I'm going to go ahead and fade this thing out. To verify everything's working, flashes, and it disappears. And now we can basically pull out our motor. So let's come here to about 24.5 seconds, and I want to highlight my motor assembly. So I think I got a few things here. I think I have a shaft as well as a gear, so I'm going to grab all three of these together. We can move components together. All you have to do is make sure they're all selected as a group. I set a location key. Although it looks like one location key in my timeline, it's really 3 separate keys for 3 separate parts. So if I come here, move this forward to about 25 seconds, I'm going to turn off camera play mode because I want to make sure I can get in here and make some pretty good movement, make sure I don't run through this top cover. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move forward a tiny bit to about here. I'm going to set a location key. Okay, so first movement, it's just coming out slightly. Right after that, I'm going to move it out even further, but I'm also going to incorporate some rotation. So I'm setting one location key. This thing is coming down to make sure we don't hit this top cover. I'll go ahead and record that. I'll zoom out a tiny bit, move my time bar forward a little more. I'm going to translate this downward now. So it's going to come out at an angle to about here. I'm going to go ahead and record that. Move my time bar forward a little bit more. And now I can pull this thing out, maybe directly out, and maybe I'll rotate it back so it's flat. Okay, so something like that, and I hit record. Let's watch what we've done so far. So I'm coming back here. Nothing selected. My bracket will disappear first. This thing comes down, pulls out, and then becomes flat. Okay, another thing we can do with our movement, instead of manipulating the actual animation line, we can come in here and we can move, we can specify. So if I grab all 3 of these components, I can come in here to animation options. Under we have path and time function. Linear, it's going to move an equal speed between point A and point B, but we do have the option to use sine. as kind of a solver for its movement from point A to point B. So I'll turn on sine, I'll go ahead and record this, and watch the difference between this movement now. It just makes it a little nicer looking. So I'll go ahead and hit play. It's a little different, a little unique, right? I kind of like that. Something I've started using in a lot of my animations. So once this thing has been pulled out, let's go ahead and zoom our camera in on it. Okay, so I'm going to turn on camera play mode, see where I'm really at when this thing comes out at about, this is actually a pretty good spot for my camera. If I need to rotate a little bit, that's fine, but I'm going to leave it as is. I'm going to grab all three of these, which is 3 components. I'm going to go ahead and set their location key at 26.5 seconds. And at 27.5 seconds, I want this thing to be exploded. So we have something called an explode tool. It's linear explode. We have spherical explode and cylindrical explode. I'm going to grab the linear explode, and I'm going to bring these 3 parts apart from one another. So it just takes whatever piece of geometry is furthest along that axis or furthest away on that axis, keeps that in place, and explodes everything out in the direction you're pulling. So I'll set that. And now I've basically recorded 6 keys, right? I have 3 keys here for each of the 3 components in this motor assembly and 3 keys here for where they are at 27.5 seconds. So I'll go ahead and hit play. Explodes out. Very, very nice. Looks good to me. Okay, so these things have been exploded out. The motor's been taken out. At this point, if we wanted to, we could continue on. We could add text and things like that. Exchange motor, possibly. Maybe I'll do that. Let's add a little bit of a label that populates on the screen. We'll do that, and then we'll do the assembly procedure as soon as that's done. So 28 seconds here. I want to add a note that says replace motor. So I'll come to my author tab, and I have something called image 2D, vector 2D, label, text. I'll use text 2D. As soon as I place text on the screen, it creates a key for when this text was at 0% opacity and is now at 100% opacity. Text can be kind of tricky in animation, in any animation tool. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to say replace motor. Okay, we'll keep it very brief. Now, keep in mind, I did change a property of this text, right? I changed the text string and what was being shown, so I have to record that in my animation. So in order to record that text, I need to hit a property key. And then I have something here called set as neutral properties. So because these 2 keys were created for this note, basically when the note was created, which is this first key here, it had no text in its string. I just recorded there being text in this string at 28 seconds. I want to make sure there's always this text in this string, right? Even at this marker before 28. So instead of going back to this first marker and retyping in replace motor and setting an additional property key just for the text string, I can highlight this text string that I changed, and I can use something called set as neutral property, which means that becomes the neutral property of this text box. It basically always looks as though the text string was always replace motor. Okay, so if I move my cursor back here, it's at 0 seconds, and you'll notice it's there at 0 seconds. So 2 things are changing, right? It's just the opacity at this point, but the text is already there, and it just fades in at 28, which is a great tool. So now that we have created this animation, I'm going to go ahead and save, which is something I should have been doing on a regular basis. Best practices, continue to save. We all know this. Did a bad job at that today. Okay, so at 28 seconds, I've added some text. Comes in. I want this text to basically be removed before this thing is reassembled. So I've done the disassembly portion of my animation. Why not just go ahead and redo, like basically have everything just copy, everything I've done, I just want to flip it around. So I'm going to highlight all the keys I've created in my animation. Okay, I could have zoomed out. It probably would have made it a little easier. I'll come back here, and then I'll zoom out now to make it easier. Okay, there's my whole animation, about 20.5 seconds, like 28 seconds. I'm going to hold down the control key, just like every other time. I'm going to copy all these keys over. And And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click and I'm going to invert the time selection. Okay? So there may be a few minor things to change as the animation plays, but let's watch this from the beginning and see how it goes. Here is where we've reverted everything backwards. And now all the keys we've created as a disassembly procedure are now all applying as an assembly procedure. And we might have some goofy movements here. We may have to go tweak it. We bring these parts in, everything gets reassembled. And look at that, I did half the work, but I have a full assembly now of how to replace my motor. Goes back to initial state. Perfect. All right, so that was animation. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in that GoEngineer question deck here. Let me see here. I actually got quite a few questions. Okay, a lot of it was didn't see anything at the beginning screen. Again, my apologies for not realizing that Internet Explorer does not show. Okay. So does a customer have to have Composer to view these publications? Actually, that question is very good. First thing I want to talk about before I talk about viewing files in Composer is that once an animation is complete, I'm going to go ahead and hit save, I have to come to the workshop here and I have something called a video workshop. Here basically I can specify my AVI output. I can change my Windows resolution if I don't like what my current Windows resolution is. So whatever the size of your graphics area, that's what it's going to record out as. So I say save video as, or excuse me, save video as. I come to Webinar 201 or wherever I want to place it, and it renames it the same name as the Composer document. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. It'll prompt me for a codec if I want to add some specific codec, or I can just use full frames. And I'll let this thing go through and basically record as it goes. So you'll notice my time bar actually moves through and records each frame individually. While that's happening, I'll continue to answer these questions, but the question I was just looking at was, do you need Composer? Does a customer have to have Composer in order to view these publications? No. Once I'm pushing out this AVI file, that is a video file that you could email to someone. You could put it onto your website. You could do whatever you choose. Now, with Composer, there is a separate free viewing tool. So for all of you who are using SOLIDWORKS now, it's similar in aspect to eDrawings, where eDrawings is a free 3D previewer for SOLIDWORKS. We have the Composer player, and this is something that anyone can download and open up a Composer file in, so you'd be able to view all the views that were created as well as the animation that was created using the tool. So that's a free tool. There's also tons of other outputs. If you would like more information about the outputs, please just let me know. Can any computer operating system view Composer? As long as that operating system can install the Composer player, then absolutely. Do you need a high-end graphics card to see nice rendered schemes? It doesn't hurt. Composer is, kind of intensive on the graphics card, so yes, I do recommend having a nice graphics card. If you're a user who uses SOLIDWORKS and the graphics are decent in SOLIDWORKS, your graphics card will be just fine for SOLIDWORKS Composer. Let's see here. Can you use hotspot, so the effect hotspot with text, to describe what the parts are? Absolutely. You can use hotspot on anything inside of Composer. It could be a balloon callout. It could be text. It could be an individual part within the assembly. It could be the ground. I mean, you can make just about anything flash in Composer like that. You can do it the manual method, where you change the emission color or the color of the part itself. Sometimes I'll just use white or yellow as a color, and that makes a good flashing. It's really just to attract the attention of the viewer. So absolutely you can. You can use Hotspot with anything. So. Someone just asked, where can I purchase Composer? No, I'm just kidding. No one did, but I'm going to let you know that GoEngineer is a good resource for any sort of Composer questions. So if you are interested in speaking with someone a little more in depth about Composer, or if you want to contact me, my contact information should be available on the invite for this Composer webinar. Feel free to email me, and I can put you in touch with the correct person to talk to about purchasing Composer. If you have additional technical questions about the product, absolutely, I'm available to you. Doesn't matter where you are. I don't care if you're in Texas, Maryland, California. I'm available to everyone within the U.S. If you're not in the U.S., sorry. Just kidding. I'm available to everyone. But that will kind of do it for our animation webinar today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I appreciate everyone's time, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.